Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to the 8th session of the Democracy in East Africa Conference. Allow me to thank the organizers, the Kofi Annan Center, UNDEF, for bringing us all together. My name is Shuvai Nyoni, and I'm the director of the African Leadership Center based in Nairobi, Kenya. It's my pleasure today to be the moderator of this session, and I'm even more excited because I'm joined by three excellently placed individuals to discuss our topic today. Our session today is entitled The Next Generation Question, Youth Inclusion in Politics. And I'm persuaded that we're in for an interesting conversation, especially because of the excellent panel we have with us. Today, we are joined by Willice Onyango, who is the Executive Director of the Youth Café in Kenya. And we'll hear a little bit more from Willice about the Youth Café and what they do. We're also joined by Ndugwa Hassan, who is Extremely Together. He's a young leader of Extremely Together and also the co-founder of Uganda Muslim Youth Development Forum. We are also joined by Ms. Passy Amayo. She is a program officer for the Society for International Development in Kenya. And as I said, we will hear a bit more from our esteemed panel as we go along. You would have seen the tagline for our panel today, which said, the median age in Eastern Africa is 18.1 years, yet youth are largely excluded from power. Now, please note power, not politics. So youth are largely excluded from power. What future does it want? What future do youth want? And how can youth increase their participation in politics? So, of course, this tagline carries with it a lot of assumptions, and I'm counting on our panelists to unpack some of those assumptions and maybe debunk some of them. But this is a really important question. These are important questions, and this is an important conversation because over the last month or so, this region, the East African region, has been beset with various violent or chaotic events. So the contested elections in Tanzania, the violence of the last few days in Uganda on the streets of Kampala and elsewhere, the law enforcement exercise that is taking place in Ethiopia, in the Tigray region, the protests by young Kenyans on a variety of issues, the demands for inclusion by young South Sudanese in the peace process that is happening there, and many, many other examples. If we go beyond East Africa and we go to other parts of the continent, we see that young Africans are protesting with both their voices and their feet, demanding change, demanding inclusion, and participating in politics, if you will. But today, our panelists represent the demographic we're talking about, so young people, and are engaged in various ways in interacting with power, but also participating in politics. So we have 45 minutes for our discussion, and now just a little bit less than 45 minutes. And we're going to engage in a conversation this afternoon. I'm hoping that our panelists will not make long speeches, but that they will really react to some of the questions that I will be posing for them, as well as questions that you will pose to them. So we're going to start out with just a couple of questions from myself, and then we will move on to take questions from the floor. So please get your questions and your comments ready and feel free to use the chat where possible to do so. So the first question that I'm going to ask, and this is for all of you, Willice, Hassan, and Passy, what does the term next generation mean to you? And how is this reflected in your work? Is the notion of future people something important for the way we think about politics? So the notion of a next, the notion of something that is to come. And who are these future people, or what is this next generation in your context, and why should we think about them when we think about politics? So I'm going to ask you, Willice, to go first, and then we'll come to Passy and then Hassan. Please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shuvai. It's an honor to be part of this esteemed panel. My name is Willice Onyango. I'm the Executive Director of the Youth Café. The Youth Café is a Pan-African youth-serving and youth-led organization headquartered out of Nairobi, Kenya. We are founded in the year 2014, and presently we work across 8 priority areas. And one of those priority areas is the political inclusion and governance centered on young people. So we have governance and political inclusion of young people as part of our strategic plan and as part of our founding principles. Actually, earlier on, our work had a narrow remit on youth engagement in the processes that are important to them. But coming back to your very important question on the issue of the next generation, let's be reminded by what Shakespeare told us, that all worlds is merely a stage, and men and women play different roles, have exits and entrances. In their lifetime, they play different parts. Young people, as it is, plays different parts. They may be young today, they are older tomorrow. They may be voters today, they are the leaders tomorrow. So at the Youth Cafe, how this is framed in our work is to develop those skills and competencies that are enabling factors in terms of providing young people with building blocks to be not only included in the important discourses that inform our lives as we know it today, but to be active citizens, to hold power to account, to nurture their leadership potential, to lead in different sectors, as broad as it is. And it is important to mention that political leadership is not the only one. We have leadership in the private sector. We have leadership in the broader scope and scheme of things. And the most important value we care about at the Youth Cafe is to give young people the opportunities and the levers of power to make informed decisions, to exercise their constitutional and democratic rights as active citizens, to hold our systems to, not only our system, but themselves too, as accountable and active citizens. And I think when you talk about the future, for me, this looks more philosophical than pragmatic, because we are living today. Future people has the connotation of people who don't exist. So if you don't include people right now, what guarantees do you have that those who are not existing will be included in the future? So for us, the performance has to be now. We have to see inclusion now. We have to see participation now. And in the future, when that future comes, we want to see enhanced participation and inclusion of our young men and women in the broad scope of inclusion continuum, whether it is in the public sector, in the private sector, and in the non-profit sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Willice. So I have a quick follow-up question for you. What will inclusion actually look like when it happens? What will we be seeing? What will we be seeing that we don't see today?
Okay. First of all, for inclusion to happen, to paint a picture of how we would see differently, is inclusion is costly. So inclusion is not a free exercise. It is very expensive for any demographic to be included. Young people, certain even subgroups within young people, such as young women, young people living with forms of disability. We have to disaggregate the kind of a framework that we have to include our young people, whether it is within political parties or within societal systems that governs us as we know it. But it also takes skills and competencies. You have to develop a certain set of skills and competencies that would ensure that if this demographic is included there, then they are capable, because ultimately what matters is capability, and capacity, and the ability to and the readiness actually also to take up those opportunities when they so come, and to prove yourself, because ultimately the question that many people will ask is that not to include young people just because of inclusion, otherwise you would include everyone, but to include young people because of the sheer experience, expertise, and competencies that are unique to them and that they bring to the body, to the table of whether it is decision making or whatever processes that we need inclusion to be seen. So that is one. And then secondly is the resource allocation against inclusion. We have had a lot of, for example, we've just mentioned the present political happenings in Tanzania, in Uganda, and in Kenya. We have an important process um, that aims to even change fundamentally how the country is constituted, the constitution of the country. These are very important processes. But what resources are allocated to ensure that young people, because of their sheer number, are included in these processes, so that ultimately we have also an inclusive society, both economically, socially, and politically. So that is one. We want to see statements and commitments to inclusion being backed by budgets and resources allocated. We want to see capacity building and skilling, upskilling young people to be ready for to be included.
Great. Thank you so much, Willice. Passy, I'm going to turn it over to you. This notion of next generation, is it, I mean, in your work at the Society for International Development, what does this look like for you? Is this a real thing? Is it a real group, this next generation? And how does it show up in your work? And if you just link it together with some of what Willice is saying around inclusion, can we hear your thoughts, Passy?
Yes. Hi, everybody, and thank you for that question. It's a very important question. And maybe just to link it to my work, as you said. So, working at the Society for International Development, I've had the opportunity to reimagine futures in different sectors, so mainly the energy sector for the East African region, where we went through a process where we said, what is the current state of the energy sector in Eastern Africa and what are the possible future pathways? But then as I engaged in this work at Society for International Development, what came to my mind is, who am I now and what are we doing in our work now and how will it impact the future generation? So you ask a very important question. Is there a next generation and who are these future people? When I think about the next generation, I think about not only myself and the opportunities that exist for future positions of making change or being in a position of changing systems that are not working for my country or for this region. So I think about myself now and the possibilities of being somebody in the near future and making an impact then. So I always go by the mantra that today's actions determine tomorrow's future. So whatever I do now has to correlate with what will happen in the future. Also in the work that I do, I always think about my children and my children's children, because these are the people that Willice says do not currently exist. But what are we doing now to set up systems that will work for them? Are we creating a legacy of corruption, for example? Are we creating a legacy of dishonesty, distrust, discontent for a generation to come and solve the mistakes of the past, or are we creating a future that they can look up to and say our forefathers, the generation that came before us set up this path for us to walk through and make it even better? So when I think about the future generation, I think about what is to come for me and my peers in the near years to come, and what are we doing now to ensure that those who are not yet born have a good future, a sustainable future to work with. So that is just my simple answer to your question.
Great, thank you so much, Passy. If I could just probe a little bit more, how then is this linked to part of our topic today, which is around inclusion in politics? Whether we think about inclusion in politics or we think about exclusion of young people from power and from the levers of power. So, where would you place yourself? Would you say young people are excluded from politics or they're excluded from power? And how is this linked to your message, which has been that we need to imagine a future and do the work now for that future?
Great, thank you so much. And let me just bring you back to some statistics that were also part of our guiding question, where we were saying the average age of people in East Africa is 18.1 years. I want to put this in a percentage for my country, Kenya, where approximately 75 or so to 80% of the population comprises of the youth. Now, when you want to look at our parliament, for example, currently, I think about 6.5% of parliamentarians are young people. Great. So there's a disconnect there in terms of the number of young people and the percentage that is actually represented in our parliament, for example. Now, there are two things that might, in my opinion, I feel might be the cause of this. So first of all, it is perhaps young people are discontented. And for this statement, I speak for myself. When I look at events that have taken place in the recent past, when I think about the protests in Nigeria with the End SARS, where young people came out to protest against police brutality, when I think about the young people in 2016 who came out in the Gambia to protest against President Yahweh Jammeh's decision to stay in office for a longer term than he actually deserved, when I think about my peers in Uganda who come out every Friday for the schools against climate change strikes, and the response from the police arresting them as young people coming to call for a right to a healthy environment in the near future. When I think about the response to young people who are actually coming out to say we want a better future for ourselves, then I see a young people who are increasingly becoming frustrated and discontented to even further engage. Because what happens is then you are playing your role with your capacity and what you can do to ensure a sustainable, a healthy, a safe future for yourself and the generations to come. But when you're met with this harsh law enforcement mechanisms, then there is discontent, and young people tend to say, okay, to keep ourselves safe, let us just stay away from whatever we need or we want. So there's discontent. The other thing that limits youth inclusion in politics is capacity. Willice talked about building literacy, and many young people are either not interested in learning the political processes or the political documents, or even, knowing what your constitution is. Sometimes I ask my peers, have you read the constitution? Do you know that it is your right to have food, that it is your right to have access to affordable, clean energy? And you find that many young people have not actually taken the time to study these documents. And then when youth are actually involved in different processes, it is in a very tokenistic manner. So, which is also, a form of inclusion that it doesn't make sense, It's not something that we want. So when I say this, what do I feel that we want for ourselves within the region, which is a very important question. What do we want as young people? In my opinion, we want to see good governance. We want to have good role models that we can look up to and say, that is a president that we also want to be like. And in a situation that we do not have that, then what are we going to do when we have the mantle on our hands to do this and to become the tool for good governance? The other thing is reward for hard work. They're young people who are actually working hard in their different spaces, both politically and unpolitically. But you tend to see that mediocrity is not punished. What is happening is people who are mediocre in the space are rewarded for their mediocrity. And the people who are actually working hard and deserve the merit are the ones who are being punished, either by being arrested or being taken out of the street. So there's a lot of discontent, lack of support, lack of capacity, and lack of literacy among the young people, in my opinion, and this limits their inclusion in political processes.
Thank you so much, Passy, and thank you for bringing in the issue of values, especially I think your point around mediocrity and how and what young people are seeing as valuable and principles in society. Let's come over to Hassan now and move over to a perspective from Uganda. Hassan, the same question, next generation. What does it mean to you? How is it playing out in your work on a day-to-day basis and the different things that you're involved in?
Thank you so much. My name is Ndugwa. I'm the executive director of the Uganda Youth Development. Our organization is a peace-building organization that is promoting values of tolerance, peace, pluralism, but specifically preventing and countering violent extremism. And we do this through training, advocacy, exchange programs, and dialogue community level, and this whole faith communities. Now, to your question, this generation, I think for me, it and the youth of today means a new leaders. It means a generation that is yearning for economically, socially, and politically, and that is seeking immediate solutions to this within their midst challenges such as poverty, limited in decision-making processes, as well as real challenges. It's a generation has been marginalized by generation whose freedoms, expression, and assembly to show satisfaction with the systems and the status quo have been denied over the years. And it's a generation whose future has been through education and health systems. And this generation is priority to me now. And this in my work with the Extreme Together, Muslim Youth Forum, as remain our main target to ensure they lead meaningful and purposeful lives with hope, positive, and reducing their susceptibility to violence. Most importantly, preparing them for natural solve of the 21st century problems. And for me, with the whole Uganda today, for example, we use that we know of electoral violence going on even now, and I would wait for the question on you think go straight. For me, it's capacity build for youth for in political meant to make young people for political leader and leadership of kind. These are underfunded and support such capacity building. But also, electoral laws, for example, do not favor the young people. For example, a person is expected here in Uganda to pay huge sums of money. And this has carried many who take up political positions, but also participate more in determining the future of countries. And we have national councils, senior others, like that, and elsewhere, and meant the main channels or structure which in politics or in is patronized, for example, in Uganda, and the oligarchs have patronized this structure, and it remains they are funded and are only used as tools of awareness, because being deliberate, financially weak, and the futures are any group to the generation by the ocean has capped power lines, and it's a pretty tough situation for young people. But I believe that what needs to be done in ensuring themselves upon the demand for space, demand for the future that they want to have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hassan. We are having some struggles with the sound, so it was a bit difficult to hear you. But I think we did pick up that your part of your own work includes capacity building, etc. But and working with faith communities, I think that came out quite clearly. Part of your work is around building the capacity of marginalized young people to secure for them to be economically secure, to be part of decision-making processes. I think you also touched on a point about how the future of young people has been hijacked, and there's almost a bleak outlook to the future. But you also pointed out that there's need to concentrate on electoral laws and how young people participate in politics, because they're often used for violence within political parties. So my question to you on that is, first of all, and I hope we'll be able to hear you a bit better. First of all, how can this view of young people being used for violence be changed? And also the work that both you and Willice spoke about, right? This capacity building work. Passy also referred to it. But how can that work be elevated to become political agendas, as opposed to work that is done by NGOs, and that might end in, having a number of young people saying that they've been trained in, how to write a manifesto or whatever the case may be? How do we elevate that to a place where it can actually bring in change? If you could just keep your response very succinct, because we will go to questions from participants now. Thank you, Hassan.
Yeah, thank you. I think again, for avoid being used as tools in the elections, for example, they engage on issues that affect, politically, for them, they're forced this policy, and it's economically beneficial, financial for someone to be a politician in Africa, because they're paid huge sums. They'll invest a lot of money that they have, even borrow, to make sure that they buy out the young people. They bribe them and that the immediate that they want, which is normally food, and maybe driving home, and to avoid that, and it should be about issues, the issues that affect younger, unemployment, poor health services, issues that they need to be confronting leaders of any candidates come, for example, and they're promising things that they're not going to fulfill. Young people should remain steadfast, and issues are going to change. And for me, that's what I think.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Passy, you want to come in?
Yes, I just want to weigh in on the current question that you asked. When young people are not being used as agents for violence, especially during electoral times, how else can the involvement of youth, become a political agenda? And I want to answer this question by bringing in what happened when the coronavirus struck all of us. Lots of young people lost their jobs. As you probably already know, at least here in Kenya, we had lots of young people who are now jobless, out of school, and now had to find another way of making a living. And unfortunately, it broke my heart when I heard about the Kazi Mtaani initiative. I mean, I want to assume that it was for a good notion, but when you look at what young people are now being engaged to do in their informal settlements and even their settlements, it's an inhumane way of compensating for their time, their strength, and their vigor as young people. I would imagine that a more politically beneficial agenda for young people would be to invest in capacity building, especially for young people who have not had the opportunity to have quality education, quality literacy opportunities or training, even if it's technical training, but to have young people go out and do odd types of jobs in the street. It's to me a way of incapacitating the youth further, and that then exasperates their need to even engage in political processes, consultations, whereas if they were empowered, they would be able to actively participate. So I think it is a call for those of us who are leaders to think more beneficially for young people within Eastern Africa, and to invest in capacity building, literacy, and training for the sake of empowerment.
Thank you, Passy. I'm going to come to you, Willice, now, and just to follow on from these points that Hassan and Passy have made. And there's a question from one of the participants around youth preparation for the future. And all of you have spoken about capacity building, you've spoken about empowerment, you've spoken about programs where young people can, be in more control of their economic futures, of their livelihoods, etc. But this participant is asking, how are the youth preparing themselves or being prepared to be the future generation? Are we alive to what the future will be like? And they've referenced here artificial intelligence, the nature of the global political economic systems, and as Passy has referred to COVID-19 and how it's affected the global economy. So all of this capacity building that we are doing, does it speak to what the future will be like? Willice, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you so much, Shuvai, and I couldn't agree more with what Hassan and Passy has raised, particularly on change in electoral reforms to be more accommodative and reflective of young people's needs and aspirations. Just to give you an example, in 2017, what we saw was the young people who qualified to vote formed over 50% of the entire voting population in Kenya. But on the election day, only merely 20% showed up to vote, and they go to polling stations not having any clue as to what they're supposed to do. But we also see a lot of systemic challenges. For example, just 3 months to election in 2017, this is when the groups and organizations that were to conduct voter education were accredited. Merely three months to an entire general election. While I think in order for consistency and sustainability, important precepts such as voter education, educating young people civically to understand their rights in the context of elections, have to almost be a cycle that doesn't that starts immediately an election ends up to the next electoral cycle. I think more consistency around these important systemic approaches that would ensure that young people are having the inherent ability to understand their role within the community is extremely important if they are to play a meaningful role, not only now, but also in the future. But when you come to the effects of technology, if you take political parties, for example, and how political parties engage with young people, we are coming from a history where most political youth wings were almost offshoots of militias. They are doing acts that are similar to those that are done by militia groups. So this discourages a lot of young people and talented youth who would want to take up opportunities in the political space. We have most young people, if you ask these people, a person who was born in the year 2001 is is now a voter. They are over 18 years right now, right? And if you take the engagement, traditional engagement that we have, bereft of innovation, creativity in terms of engaging a different group that has emerged, needs to be engaged. And what we have now seen is a huge apathy among young people within the system. The integrity of key institutions, constitutional institutions, that do not, have affected by issues related to public trust. Young people don't trust public. We need to lower or reduce drastically the amount of increasingly deteriorating trust that young people have within public institutions that are there to ensure or guarantee their inclusion. And this comes with new ways of doing things, such as innovation. You mentioned artificial intelligence. If you made a voter registration or be a very easy and painless exercise, how many young people would be registered to vote? And that dramatically changes the inclusion question. Ultimately, this is used to decide who leads you and how resources are allocated. These are very important questions and issues that affect young people in East Africa. In Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. We have to make our systems fit for the 21st century. We cannot be stuck in the 19th century of doing things or of engagement, the same politics of patronage. A number of young people grow up in cosmopolitan towns. They do not necessarily resonate very closely with the tribal affiliations that inform politics. So if you have to mobilize based on ethnicity, then it puts off a young person who doesn't feel any closeness with ethnic persuasion as a mechanism of mobilizing vote, right? So these are and some of the issues that Hassan has raised around electoral. We need to see a code of conduct, even among electoral institutions. It is good that electoral institutions are also represented, that guarantees very almost irreducible minimum in terms of educating young people on their rights, enhancing their participation and not inhibiting that function, and come with radical codes of conduct, such as a political fund for youth, especially talented youth, because you also have to lower the cost of political participation for young people. They may have very innovative ideas on how to transform our society, but they have not lived for 80 years to accumulate wealth from all manner of quarters in order to effect an outcome of an election. If a young person only shows up with their ideas and their vision that they have for a better future, and that has to be supported by a political fund for youth, for example. And this is something that I think can drastically increase and create incentives also too for young people to participate, to see the value and meaning of their participation.
Thank you, Willice. So your intervention has got me to one final question, which I hope you will each use to make your concluding remarks, and I'll give you just 1 minute because we are almost at the end of our time together. And that question is this: each of you also talked about the corporate sector. Passy, you referred to the energy sector as places where young people are included, are participating, are making interventions. Now, is the ways in which you have talked about inclusion, which is around, you've all talked a lot about elections, you've talked about political party activity. Are these the only ways in which we should be thinking about young people in politics? Not only young people in politics, but young people engaging with power and political power. Are these the only ways? What other ways should we be thinking about in this region about how young people can engage with power when we think about inclusion? What else can we think about beyond elections, beyond political parties? And bringing to bear, bearing in mind everything you have said about capacity building, literacy, etc. So this is just the last question. Please use it for your concluding remarks as we close our session together. So just a minute each, please. Let's start with you, Hassan.
So much. I think for me, first of all, youth, need to realize that there's no system to thrive, whether economic or political. It's unfortunate that our governments are still see young people as rather than. And I'll give an example. For example, our government a number of labor companies just export of young people to the Arab world, and I mean that's the solution to just not the burden of Uganda. But is this a sustainable way? I don't think so. So for me, I think you need to again use their numbers to demand for a better future, and the other ways they can still engage politics besides election. I think young people need to present realities, their own countries. For example, if agriculture in Uganda is the most profitable activity, how can the young people thrive in it? How can they be leaders in agriculture? If it's fishing, how can they be leaders, for example? If it's protection of if it's mining, how can they be leaders in all those sectors? And I also want to talk about the values. Michael, it's important that young people are nurtured to have and the values that are acceptable in society in the 20th century, the values that are going to enable us to become leaders of today and tomorrow, who are not going to make the same mistake that the old generation has made. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Hassan. Willice, I'll come to you, please. 30 seconds, and then we'll close with Passy. Just 30 seconds for you, please, Willice.
Thank you so much, Shuvai. For me, inclusion covers three important sectors. There's civic inclusion, there's business inclusion, and then there's the public sector inclusion. So when we talk about youth inclusion, we want to see youth included effectively, being part of the business community, being part of the private sector, and being part of the civic sector. And since the panel is more oscillating towards the civic sector and around elections, it's just to reiterate that election is just as an event that is a culmination of series of events that take place over 4 years or 5 years sometimes. So we need to see inclusion happening within a cycle, within a framework of a cycle, and not being caught off time by last-minute intervention towards including young people towards the end, very tail end of processes. We want to see more inclusion that is more well thought out, well programmed and integrated, being integral part of the systems that we have around us.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Willice. Passy.
Great, thank you. My closing remarks will be a call to the current generation of leaders in politics and also to my peers. And I just want to tell the current generation of leaders in politics about 6 things that I think will be key for youth inclusion. First, remove constitutional restrictions that stop youth from engaging in politics. That is of utmost importance. Number 2, young people need to have and embrace their freedom of speech and security, especially when they're getting involved in political processes, movements, and marches. Another thing is you need to meaningfully engage us as young people in governance, appoint us, and especially the competent people into your cabinets across the region, because they are competent young people. So appoint us, make use of us. We're there. Another thing is, please ensure that political parties have dedicated slots for youth to run for parliamentary and state positions, at least. Finally, let's ensure that the Minister of Youth is at least less than 35 years old and competent, so that we're well represented. And then finally, make use of the digital advancements that are going on. What if we invested in electronic voting? For me, I think this will ensure that voting cannot be easily rigged and that the votes of the people count, which will then make it easier for young people to be elected into positions. And then finally, a call to my peers, the young people: learn the political documents and the political processes, the constitutions of our countries and the policies of our countries. Take up spaces of leadership and thrive in them, because we can take our political positions and we can organize meaningful political processes that ensure a good future for ourselves, our children, and our children's children. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I will not try to summarize everything that our panelists have said. They've thrown a lot on the table. I think they've given us new ways of thinking about this next generation, what this actually means for us. I think very important points around values that Hassan brought to the table, serious calls to action and areas of taking action that Passy has put on the table. And Willice reminding us that, the political arena is not the only arena where young people need to be included and where they can make a mark and also impose themselves. So the civic space is important, the business space and the public sector, all very important spaces. Thank you very, very much to these 3 excellent panelists. It has been a pleasure speaking with you this afternoon. Unfortunately, time and also technology has not been fully on our side, but it has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I look forward to interacting with you all much more. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and thank you so much to the Kofi Annan Center for this opportunity. Good afternoon.
Thank you.